Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. At least 22 people have been killed since unrest began in Madagascar, culminating in the military seizing power after the president fled. The AU has suspended the country as well. Will this coup bring stability or worsen the country's political crisis? Authorities in Ivory Coast arrested 237 people during a banned protest a few weeks before the October 25th election. Opposition leaders banned from the race have vowed to keep protesting. Will this unrest affect the credibility of the elections? President Bola Tinubu has named Professor Amupitan, SAN from Kogi State as the new INEC Chairperson, succeeding Mahmood Yakubu after his 10-year tenure. Will this change in leadership impact public trust in Nigeria's electoral process? Joining us today for further insight on the podcast is Confidence Mark Harry, a senior analyst at SPM Intelligence. Welcome, Confidence, to the podcast.
Hello, Veronica. Good evening. Good evening to our listeners. I think it's kind of good to be back here, I think.
I know, right? It's always good to have you on the podcast because we have like interesting conversations around security. Today, we're starting with our first story where we're looking at the protest and crisis that is currently happening in Madagascar. So we have been seeing protests all around the world, championed by young people, the Gen Z generation, as they say. And now Madagascar is the latest where we're seeing the president has fled the country, the military has taken over. What do you think is causing unrest? I mean, globally, but our focus here is on Madagascar. What has led to this unrest, and which has also led to the military taking over? I mean, most countries right now have a democratic rule. And most times you don't want military to come in because, when they come in, they take a long time. The rule of law sometimes is suspended, the constitution, you have human rights issues. So why do you think this is happening in Madagascar? What is triggering this?
Yeah, you were saying that you don't want the military to come in. I was asking, says who?
We don't want the military to take over. Democracy I mean, has proven to be one of the best systems if you look at the pillars of democracy as well.
And that's the problem. So I think I'll segue into answering your question. You Given the surveys I have read from organizations like Afrobarometer and several other ones about attitudes to democracy on the continent, you will get to see that many young people do not really mind having a non-democratic system in the sense that having the military coming to take power because they felt that the the ruling elite, the civilians, the democratically elected, if you use that term, have the democratically elected leaders have not lived up to the billing. Case in point, 2020, where you had the groundswell opposition to President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita's attempts to tinker with the country's judiciary. There was a lot of support for the military taking over, and we see similar attitudes across the continent, even in Nigeria, where I think in 2020 I wrote this op-ed about warning my people in my generation to be too enthusiastic about the military taking over in Nigeria, given military history in Nigeria. We see the same discontent that is being shown and an impatience, or I wouldn't even say impatience, I would say discontent that is being shown by young people in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Senegal, in Kenya, in Mali. We've seen similar bits of that in Madagascar, where for the past 3 weeks, the young people have been protesting. I should also not leave out Morocco, who is having their Gen Z 212 protest according to the country code. You know, so they've been protesting power cuts, water cuts, and several other infrastructural deficits and gaps in in the country's capital in Antananarivo. And I think the president then, Andrew Rajoelina, who came to power in 2009 off the back of a popular uprising, tried to appease the protesters by firing a few people in the government, but that didn't seem to work. And then he decided to turn his military to open fire on the protesters. International organizations are saying that between 20 and 30 people have died, but the government's own estimate is a little bit conservative. It's about 15 people. And so events have unfolded in the past couple of days where a tipping point came within the past 3, 4 days when members of the elite capsule unit in the Madagascar military joined in the protesters, and then seeing that the president had no choice but run away. Yeah, he jackpot. That's exactly what he did. I think he's a dual citizen of France. France is a former colonial master, and then he went to France. And now, as of the last time we checked, the military is claiming that they've taken over government. So yeah. Why? As to why this thing is happening, if you look at the broader picture for the African continent, I do think I was telling you the other time that this seems to be a generational thing. If you look at the timeline of protests in the world, according to, let me not even start from post World War II. Look at what started World War One to begin with. Gavrilo Princip, who shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in June 1914, was a young guy. If you compare with the current generation, he could be the Gen Z. He could be the ultimate Gen Z protester of his time. And then he tried to take away Austrian yoke against the Serbian people. And then he shot the Archduke, who he feels was symbolic of the Austrian yoke on his people. So we have these things where the younger generation are usually very, should I say, militant in their demands. And the thing about Africa is that one of the reasons why, say, for instance, we are seeing in Francophone West Africa and across the Sahel a bit of a discontent with the status quo and making their new leaders turn to the East instead of the West for support, despite what the partnerships they've always known since independence, is down to the fact that the current generation did not live through the wars of independence or the independence periods where France forged a relationship post-colonial relationship with many of these countries and the political elites. All they've known all their lives since the turn of the century has been mismanagement of the country's resources, poverty, inequality, and so many other things. So the kind of things you get to expect from them, the tie-in and all of that you come to expect from them, you expect them to have with, say, the former colonial power. They do not have it. They do not have it. And then, given that we're in the social media age where it is information in the jet age on steroids, and so a protest in particular parts of the world, unlike in 1914, where you could take weeks or months or even years to start a similar thing. Now, at the click of a button, you just enter TikTok and then you see in a protest in one part of the world say, yeah, we should do that thing. There, we're having similar issues. And
Okay. I mean, I agree with you that a lot of young people haven't gotten the best of democracy from their government, right? But I mean, I'm still team democracy because now that we've even seen in Madagascar, as the military took over, they suspended some institutions. They formed a transitional committee to govern for up to 2 years before elections. So, they have already made that decision of no election till after 2 years, suspended institutions that, were brought by democratic rule to ensure that people's voices are heard. I mean, that's just one of the things that comes with military rule. Um, but let's also see that, I mean, the AU responded quickly, by suspending the country. Now, is this suspension a familiar response? Do you think that it's just it's not going to do anything? It's not gonna have any real impact, deterring the military from taking over in the continent. Do you think I mean, the suspension, is it gonna have any effect in Madagascar? Are they going to say, okay, the military, we're not gonna, we're not gonna rule, we're just gonna give it. I know they've stated that they're gonna give it back.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I lost it for a second.
Okay. So I was just saying the AU has suspended the country. What's your thoughts on that? Do you feel that they acted quickly? Do you feel that it's going to have like a lasting impact? It will be able to also push or force these transitional governments to change their stance on having elections after 2 years, to say, okay, let's just try to stabilize the country for like a few months, maybe a month or two, and then get the country rolling by putting out elections.
Also, one of the things why, to answer your question directly on if it's going to, what the AU's decision is going to have in terms of impact, we are seeing a wave of anti-institutionalism, especially with international organizations, not just in Africa, but I think around the world, where the international organizations set up after World War II have not really done move the needle in stopping the kind of wars that the UN necessarily did not have in mind. So the UN system was set up to stop a global war. So far, we haven't had a third world war, but other things in terms of conflict within the respective borders of these countries have not really seen a respect from such international organizations. The EU being one of these, which deems any coup or any hostile government takeover against a democratically elected government an unconstitutional change, which then warrants sanctions. So the crazy thing about Madagascar's military coup, quote unquote, is that the military was invited by the High Constitutional Court to take over government, and so in that regard, it sort of blurs the line. It complicates things because the military could say, "See, we didn't take the government, we didn't take over the government in a hostile takeover. We were invited by the constitutionally set up courts to take over government." So let's be honest, they're not fooling anyone. It's a military rule. And so as to the ability of the military to keep to their word, to return to democratically elected governments within 2 years, I think it remains to be seen. Given that Madagascar is quite a poor country, and it's very possible that mirroring what we've seen as trends across the continent, where we've seen the military take over in Sudan, in Chad, in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and then they promise to get to and even in Guinea, and then they promise elections within the shortest possible time frame, and then they renege on their promises. It's very hard, given such trends, to see the Malagasy military not doing the same thing. And so, a lot of this will come down on the will of the protesters to sustain protest after 2 years if they haven't gotten what they wanted. I think a little bit of a trade-off may happen if the military who have taken over try to solve some of the problems that took the protesters to the streets. They say the issues of water, the issues of both water and electricity, they decide to solve only one and do it very well. If it could be better water supply or better electricity supply, I do think that they might actually provide a blunting effect on the ability of the young protesters to get back onto the street, because in some way you now introduce divisions into their ranks, and then it gives you that bit of a credibility, or as a credible alternative to the democratic elite or the civilian elites who, after being in government for so many years, have not been able to deliver on this kind of a basic promise. And so I do think in summary that a lot of it will have to come down on what the military does at their performance. But I wouldn't that if these things continue and then these challenges continue and then the military tries to oversee Israel come out of the 2 years, we might have to see a little bit of mumbling going on that, but they actually reflect into a broader pressure on the country's ruling elites.
Okay. Thank you for that. So let's move on to our second story, where we're seeing arrests, protests, even when the protests have been banned ahead of the October 25th elections in the country. So we see that in Ivory Coast, there's going to be an election. The president wants to come for another term. Opposition have been banned from the race. What is happening in Ivory Coast? I mean, we're seeing protests there, but we're also seeing a protest in Ivory Coast, young people still coming out to the street, opposition leaders, even though they have been banned from taking part in the elections, are still protesting. Just kind of give us a breakdown of what is fueling this tension, between the present Ivorian government and the opposition, especially ahead of their elections on the 25th.
So, one of the things we first of all have to understand is that Ivory Coast is one of the more stable countries in a West African region that is marked or is rocked by a lot of instability. It's a very vital, very, very vital country in West Africa and Africa. So we have a president which led to a lot of opposition. He was supposed to have left office during COVID. I think where his party sort of came to an understanding that he is going to he's going to hand over power to Amadou Gon Coulibaly. If I'm getting, sorry, let me confirm. Amadou Gon Coulibaly was a former prime minister of Ivory Coast, and then he died yeah, he died in July 2020. So he was a person that Alassane Ouattara was tipping to replace him. He was prime minister from January 2017, and in fact, it was the ruling party's candidate in the 2020 election, and it was among the favorites to win. But he died. He died. So after he died, Ouattara decided to run for a third term, and he won. But the opposition then was not as strong as it is now. What has ignited this protest now is that we have Tidjane Thiam, who is a former executive at Credit Suisse in France, as one of the main opposition candidates were who were excluded. This is also in addition to people, somebody like President Laurent Gbagbo, who was president in 2010, when the last major election, post-election upheaval is about 3,000 the country's post-election unrest. So these two prominent figures have been disqualified for various reasons. I think for TJ Piam, it was down to the fact that he had his dual citizenship, and then one archaic law was revoked to deny him a place in the election. And so his party members, his party supporters have been protesting for quite some time. Um, you know, I should also add that in 2016, the constitution removed credit limits, which gave Ouattara, who is in his mid 80s, I think. Yes, the last time I checked, it was 83, gave him the opportunity to run for an unlimited term. So they have been protesting. I mean, the members of the opposition and the supporters, they have been protesting, and they've been trying to get back these excluded leaders back on the voting list. And the government is not yielding to their demands. So that has been the bulk of the standoff so far. And over the weekend, 237 people were arrested on Saturday, and the protests were banned in the capital. Yeah.
Yes. Protests have been banned. What do you, and like the opposition leaders have also been banned from taking part um in the elections. I mean, what's going to be the outcome of the elections? Don't you think that with everything that is going on, he's going to win? It doesn't even matter if the people are taking to the streets to protest. Do you think that people would bother coming out to vote? Because it's kind of like you already know what's gonna happen. Isn't that going to fuel like voter apathy as well? And also the exclusion of key opposition leaders from the ballot. What significance is it going to have as well?
So you do not it's only members of the opposition that have largely been protesting against this perceived authoritarian drift. As somewhat unpopular as Ouattara's attempts to remain in office, there is still a level of people um, who still support him. I'm looking at his approval rating. We are seeing about 43%, 43.9, nearly 44% of people saying they're mostly satisfied with his rule. So his ruling party, I think the Ufuetists, Boigny, I'm sorry, I'm not French, so I can't really pronounce it. They still have their supporters and everything. So, to the exclusion of the other candidates, it seems to be an easy road for him to coast to victory to get a fourth. And so he is likely to do that, except something dramatically changes and the protest gets so heated that the elections are cancelled ahead of it's in Guinea faced in 2021. The same problem that Ali Bongo faced in Gabon in the same period. Yes, of course, they tinkered with the country's electoral system. They got illegal tenure extensions. But the problem was what came after. It changed the country's trajectory. So in Guinea, he was ousted just a few days after the results were announced, and the military took over with Colonel Mamadou Doumbouya from the elite military units taking over the government. And we see a similar thing in Gabon happening where protests led by a lot of disaffected voters led to the military taking over and Ali Bongo and his family were detained. So given that Ivory Coast has a history of election-induced civil unrest, it is likely that we might be back to the dark days of 2010, 2011, where the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, had to intervene to get President Laurent Gbagbo out of office and then to get Alassane Ouattara in. I should also remind our listeners that a lot of people died in that particular crisis. I think that was Ivory Coast's second civil war. So it's a country that is very touchy. It's a country that is always on the precipice. But Ouattara may have done quite a great job in stabilizing the country's economy, so much so that some people who might be grudgingly looking at his authoritarian drift might decide to hold their noses and vote for him. But given that some of the people he had left out, he and the electoral umpire had left out of this exercise in this round, I do think that it's going to be a really big problem. And given the size of Ivory Coast, given its importance in terms of the economy and the political calculus of the region, I do think that the result, if it is not handled, is going to have a lot of repercussions for the region.
I mean, I'm looking forward to what will come out of the elections that are coming up on the 25th. Let's move over to our final story where we look at the new INEC chairperson appointment by President Bola Tinubu. What are your initial thoughts of the president's choice of our new INEC chairman? And how would you assess the past chairman Mahmood Yakubu's legacy after his 10 years leading INEC?
I did not have preliminary thoughts about the new guy, Professor Joash Ojo but it stands to me. I mean, currently looking at a list of people who have headed the electoral umpire since 1960. These guys are academics. Professor Mahmood Yakubu was an academic. His predecessor, Professor Tayiru Jega, was an academic, like that, like that, like that. Let me look at the list now. I'm seeing from 1964 to 1966, we had Eyo Eswa from 1976 to 79. We had Michael Ani from 1980 to 1983. We had Justice Ove Whiskey from 1987 to 1989, rather, we had Professor Emeritus Ewa. From 1989 to 1993, we had Humphrey Nwosu, who conducted the 1993 elections, which said to be the freest and the fairest. And in 1993, we had In the same year, we had Professor Kohn. We are in 1994, during the Abacha era, we had Soma Dagogo Jack as INEC chairman or the chairman of the NEC. And then from 1998 to 2000, we had Justice Ifem Apata. From 2000 to 2005, we had Dr. Ebe Gubadia. And then 2005 to 2010, we had Professor Maurice Iwu of the 2007 election fame, which were so bad that the era as well administration said that nah, this process that we came by which we came into office is really, really flawed. We have to do something, and led to the flurry of the electoral amendments that began in 2010. And so in 2010, Asayu Jega was appointed, and then from 2015, after the 2015 election, he couldn't get a second term. Professor Mahmood Yakubu was appointed. So I think the longest serving electoral umpire in Nigeria's independence history. He served 10 years. Other people mostly serve on the average 4 5 years, and he got 10 years, you know. So now, as to what his impact or what his legacy would be, I do tilt more towards the negatives. So he came in with a lot of fanfare about changes to the electoral system. There were a lot of proposed improvements. So the thing with the bimodal voters accreditation system, BVAS, we had innovations like the INEC result viewing portal and everything. But that thing, he had been able to oversee two elections, 2019 and 2023. But the 2023 elections with that thing around his neck, in the sense that INEC had so much goodwill for the first time in I think since 1999. Nigeria had the kind of turnout that it hadn't seen. You know, it would take generations to get that kind of a turnout. Officially, the turnout was suppressed, and the mismanagement of the elections, the inability of voters and the election managers to view results live just made a mess of the whole thing, made a mess of the process, made a mess of the budget. I should mention that INEC got, at the very least, 350 billion naira in its budget for that election, and many people were left dissatisfied. The the winner of the presidential election was declared, left a lot to be desired. The official winner of the election got 8 million votes, and then the opposition got 10 million votes rather, and then the opposition, PDP and the Labour Party got 6 million votes, and 8 million votes, which, if you combine these things together, sort of made a mockery of the turnout. And there's so many other things that went wrong in that election, where even if somebody wants to give him credit for introducing some of these changes in the election, one can hardly look past this. And to make it worse, his legacy will be tilted a lot by what we now came to be introduced as number one, the legacy of inconclusive elections, where we had a lot of state elections being inconclusive. You know, we had to have a lot of supplementary elections, and then there was also the one that happened in Imo State in 2019, where somebody who obviously came forth in the polls automatically became first after the quarter. Although yes, you cannot really or readily say that this is the fault of the electoral umpire, but but the mere fact that the court was able to do that voodoo mathematics to get somebody who came forth in the election and then over displace the people who came ahead of him and to make him governor is quite telling of the shoddy job that INEC had done, you know, in that particular election, amongst other things. So I don't think that, given all of these things that I've said, that independently history is going to look kindly on Professor Mahmood Yakubu. And so the new guy who comes in, earlier today he was being screened by the National Assembly, is going to have a lot of work to do in trying to restore the credibility of a bad credibility hit electoral umpire, which many people certainly do not have any hope or any confidence in.
I mean, he has like some work to do, and he's just jumping in, and he's going to have the Anambra governorship elections for 8th of November. He's going to also have the FCT area council elections in February. what do you think? You said something like he has to do some work. What do you think are the kind of reforms or policy directions that he has to take to immediately stir people and build public trust and confidence in the system? Do you think that him being a professor, especially a SAN, a professor of law, that he would come with a difference and he'll be able to, build that trust and confidence that people have in elections? But most importantly, what do you think he should do, the electoral reforms that would immediately show people that he is a man for the job, kind of?
So one of the things he has to do, I think the Anambra elections will be the the first test will be number one, election management. And when I mean by election management, getting INEC people to where they're supposed to be at the right time. And that's the first part. Number two, make sure you use it. Make sure you use it to a great deal. Make sure you use it to a great effect, because not only do people budget for it, this is one of the ways by which you can exude transparency, And so, away from that, in terms of the scrutiny by which public officers come into office through the polls, I think INEC has a lot of work in making sure that the wrong people don't get into office. And what I mean by wrong people, early this week or last week, we have somebody in the Nigerian parliament resigning because of forged certificates. This is something that the INEC is supposed to do. You're supposed to verify the certificates of the people who are running for office. And so right now we have so many people with questionable certificates, academic or professional certificates in office. And I do think that the mere fact that you have people resigning or the court overturning elections is an indictment on the ability of the electoral umpire to actually do its job. So these are some of the little things that the incoming person would have to do. Make sure that the people that's coming to office, you screen them thoroughly. Make sure that who they are is actually what they say they are. And if you have any laws that are banning questionable characters rather, from getting into office, implement it. Do not be selective in your judgment, and make sure that whatsoever kind of undue interference you get to have from the political class, especially from the government, you resist it. One of the things people will be looking at with the new guy is his ability to resist pressure, especially from the presidency. These are the people that are appointed there. And given what we've seen in previous elections and the inability of the electoral umpire to remain impartial, I do think that for the people who would hope that his tenure is going to be different, this is some of the things they're going to be looking out for.
Thank you very much, Confidence, for joining us on today's episode and for sharing your insight with us. It's always a pleasure having you on the podcast.
It's a pleasure being here on the podcast.
Thank you. To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast for searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for listening and see you all next week.